Well, well, well. How strange it is, isn't it? The very ones who swore they'd leave you nothing now tremble at the sound of your voice echoing in marble courts and blood-soaked hallways. They left you out of the will? Darling, you became the will. And tonight, we speak of that unholy resurrection. They counted you out before the ink dried. The vultures circled. The lawyers whispered. The heirs sharpened their teeth. All of them certain you'd be too broken, too beneath blood, too far outside the golden chain to ever rise. They thought you'd sit in silence, that your silence was agreement. But they didn't understand that your silence was strategy, that your absence from the table was the greatest opening move ever played. Because when they sat there, laughing in velvet, dividing legacy like meat at a feast, they never once imagined you were watching their greed, watching their schemes, watching their rot. They forgot one thing. You were born in the shadows, but shadows are not weak. They are witnesses. They record everything. But what they didn't know is that legacy has nothing to do with paperwork. Bloodlines are not defined by ink and power. Power isn't inherited, it's taken. They wanted you erased from the story, so you became the new story, the kind carved in fire, in cosmic law, in divine correction. You didn't just challenge the will, you overwrote it. And when they saw your name, not in the margins, but engraved across every decree, every verdict, every God-forsaken clause, they didn't just panic, they unraveled. Let them gossip. Let them scream in courtrooms, tear their hair in empty mansions, beg ancestors that no longer recognize their names. Because when you walked in, you didn't carry grief. You carried proof. Not just of fraud or betrayal, but proof of something far more terrifying, that the forsaken can rise, that the forgotten become gods. They said you didn't belong. You weren't on the birth certificates, not in the secret family gatherings, not in the chosen circle. But now you're the signature that finalizes every page. Now you're the author. Now you're the storm clause. And every rule they played by, you burned it. Not out of rage, but out of reconstruction. You redefined worth. You corrected the bloodline. You reminded them divine right isn't passed down, it's earned, and it's taken back. They call you cruel. They say you went too far, that you could have forgiven them, turned the other cheek, let the dead rest. But why? Why should you spare those who buried you alive? Why should you mend a dynasty that spat you out like disease? You didn't rise for revenge. You rose for truth. You rose because silence was no longer sacred. You rose because injustice dared to call itself family. So no, you're not cruel. You're corrective. You're not vengeful. You are necessary. Let history show. You didn't fight for a seat at the table. You turned the table into ash. And now, your name is the seal. Your voice is the ruling. Your presence is the inheritance. They will rewrite archives just to pretend you weren't real. But the ink has dried, and your name, the one they choked on, is now law. To the ones who laughed when you were disinherited, to the ones who scoffed, smirked, schemed, look again. You didn't just flip the case. You flipped the bloodline. They left you nothing, and you turned it into everything. You were never in the will, because you were never meant to be owned. Now look who's writing the laws. They thought the will was the final word, a sealed decree, a sentence from the dead that could never be questioned. But what fools they were. They never realized a will cannot contain what is cosmically chosen. No legal language can bind a soul written in storms. and no ancestral decree stands a chance against someone who has survived the furnace of rejection and still smiled with teeth sharpened by prophecy. They thought you'd fight for a fragment of what was yours. But you didn't. You stood, calm, composed, and watched as they collapsed under the weight of their own lies. You weren't just left out of the will. You were too vast to be written into a document designed for cowards. You weren't supposed to exist, not in their stories, not in their structure. You were the mishap, the outlier, the afterthought. But when they saw the system bend to your voice, when the scales of justice cracked open for your hand, when the bloodline shifted in real time, they panicked. They called it luck. They called it madness. They called it magic. And they were right, because it was magic, the kind that can't be learned, can't be passed down, only survived. They wrote you out of the legacy, but they didn't realize you were never the heir. You were the reckoning. They thought they'd covered every loophole. They wrote with precision, cold precision, cruel precision, the kind of precision that only cowards possess when they think you're not watching. But they didn't know what kind of eyes were watching. They didn't know that you had memorized every betrayal like scripture, every missing page, every unspoken name, every skipped paragraph. And now those words they trusted to cage you have become the exact spells you used to burn their dynasty to the ground. They thought their paper trail was untraceable, but you followed the scent of generational arrogance straight to the throne room. And there, in front of everyone, you became the claws they forgot to fear. Now they whisper in rooms filled with lawyers and legacy advisors. How did they win? How did they know? Who told them? But they'll never understand, because they don't know the kind of knowledge that is earned through exile. You didn't learn from textbooks. You learned from the cold floor where no one came to check on you. From the locked doors, the forced smiles, the fake apologies, and the legal knives. They studied contracts. You studied betrayal. They read the law. You became the law. They filed documents. You filed every wound into a weapon sharper than any judge's gavel. Their children will read your name in the amended records. Their grandchildren will inherit stories soaked in your fire. And no one will ever explain how the one they left behind became the very author of their future. You don't need their approval. You don't need their apologies. You don't need a signature from the dead to justify your dominion. You are the flame that walked out of silence, the god they refused to name, the chaos they thought they'd buried. Now crowned and unbothered, you are not in the will, because your spirit doesn't fit in lines. It breaks them, it rewrites them, and now it owns them. They cursed your name, but now they must recite it in legal briefs. They erased your face, but now it's on every document that determines their fate. They mocked you in whispers, but now they flinch when your silence enters the room. And you don't gloat, you don't scream. You simply walk with the quiet authority of someone who rewrote the hierarchy of blood, bone, and betrayal. You weren't in the will, but now your existence has rewritten every rule. You didn't win, you woke up. You didn't take their place. You made your own realm, where they now apply for mercy. And the next time someone dares to exclude you, to diminish you, to write you out, they'll pause, because they'll remember what happened to the last ones who tried. You weren't in the will, because you were never meant to be anyone's legacy. You became the legacy. You became the law. You became the last word. And now, the ink is yours.